Morning, everybody. I hope everybody, I know everybody's joining us very gradually, so I shall hold on while the numbers come up. Okay, good morning, everybody. So I'm Debbie Francis. I am here to chair the session today. And for many of you, you'll know that this session is covering something that is top on the list of my favourite topics. We're going to be looking in today's session, we've got some great speakers, and we're going to be looking at how major projects in the north of England can be delivered and generate the economic growth and levelling up. As many of you know, at the moment, there is a lot of uncertainty. Those that heard Mark Thurston speaking at the committee, through what he said, through lots of doubts in respect of phase 2B, because he said, they were working on the leg to Crewe, but not working on the leg past that from a rail perspective. We all understand, many of us who will be listening to this today, understand that NPR relies on 80 kilometres of HS2 in order to piece that together. There's been no IPR, which is what the NPR is relying on. So there's lots of uncertainty. But today, what I'm hoping we're going to look at is, it's a little bit like make that assumption that these projects we're aware of are going to happen. And let's remember that there are lots of other major infrastructure projects going on in the region as well. There's an awful lot of work going on around the highways and the infrastructure that's needed there. And there are some, with the Transpennine upgrade, there's some major work already taking place. Lots of businesses and local government are fully engaged in pressing the government nationally in respect of where we stand with regards to funding for some of our future visions. But today, we really want to try and consider how we can actually deliver the programmes and how do we make sure through that delivery that they generate the economic growth and the levelling up that we need here in the north of England. So I'm really excited today to introduce a number of speakers who are going to provide insight on this topic. And the first of those that I'm going to introduce to is Ian Mobbs. And Ian is Head of Strategic Planning at Network Rail, and he joined Network Rail in 2016 to work on Northern Powerhouse Rail programme. He has led the preparation of the train service spec for the overall NPR programme, and he's coordinated the development work to assess those options for Sheffield to Leeds and Sheffield, Leeds and Hull corridors. He's also worked really closely with Transport for the North in preparing the successful business case submissions for touchpoint funding for connections between HS2 and the Network Rail infrastructure. And for the past 15 months, he's been working really closely with the Department of Transport in developing the integrated rail plan. So maybe you can give us a little bit more insight in respect of that as well. So Ian, over to you.
So good morning, everybody. As Debbie's introduced me, I'm Ian Mobbs. I work for Network Rail. I'm Head of Strategic Planning, and we'll try and do some of those things that Debbie gave me the introduction. Not too sure I can say too much about the integrated rail plan because it's the Secretary of State's document, and the Secretary of State hasn't as yet been able to publish it. But we'll talk about the things that we can talk about. So that's a little bit about me in terms of what's on the screen and the introduction. So can I have the next slide, please, Clemmy? Thank you. So Network Rail has a pretty key role in terms of doing work in terms of early stage development. We have been working very, very closely with Department of Transport and Transport for the North collaboratively over the last, well, at least the last 5, 6, 7 years on the Northern Powerhouse Rail programme. It's important to say that HS2 are obviously involved as well. We are trying to demonstrate flexibility, collaboration, a common sense of purpose to try and sort of develop these massive programmes and get them to a point where decision makers can start and make funding decisions about them. So whilst on the screen you've got sort of screenshots of the TfN strategic plan, the NPR network, and the HS2 network as it sort of currently stands. There are other documents out there that need to be, or soon to be out there, that will sort of provide some further clarity on that ambition. But as I said in my introduction, can't unfortunately say anything about the integrated rail plan, although it will clearly have a key role to play. But it's also worth just touching on the whole industry strategic plan, yet another rail industry acronym. But again, that is there to provide some focus and some clarity to decision makers that will provide that focus. So why are we doing this? What we're trying to do, what Network Rail is trying to do, is to essentially to understand how the outputs, which I've listed on the right hand side of that slide, so in terms of journey time, frequency, capacity, and reliability, can actually be delivered. But it's about making sure that what we're trying to achieve are both realistic in terms of their value for money and affordable, and to recognise that as part of how these programs have evolved, it is very much an iterative process, so that we need to be sort of cognizant of what the advice and the analysis is telling us, so that we can reflect that thinking into the work that we are doing, so that we have that sort of transparency as to how the work gets completed, so that we can then successfully move through those different sort of stage gates that we need to work through. So at the moment, there's obviously significant focus on the strategic outline case and getting that moved forward. So how is Network Rail trying to sort of improve the timescales to get projects sort of progress through that project life cycle? So if I could have the next slide, please, Clemmy. So one of the initiatives that we are very much in the process of progressing at the moment is something called Project Speed, which is an acronym, another acronym, but is intended to be Swift, Pragmatic, Efficient Enhancement Delivery. So on the slide, there are two very ambitious statements there in terms of halving the time and slashing the cost of project delivery. So how are we going to actually go about doing that to try and make the delivery of projects more efficient and less costly? So Project Speed is all about a cross-industry response, which involves Network Rail and the department at this stage, although we recognise that would eventually need to be rolled out more extensively. So there's a series of pilot projects ongoing at the moment, where we're then trying to sort of use those pilots as best practice examples, and then share those lessons learned across the business. So there's three of the six major projects that Project Speed is being applied to effectively relate to the North of England geography. So you have the Midland Main Line, so electrification, so that's essentially looking at Market Harborough north to Nottingham, and then across to Derby and up to Sheffield. So that's one of the schemes. There is the Manchester Reliability Improvement Programme, and then the Transpennine Route Upgrade. But we're by no means just confining the efforts on speed to just those very large and very major programmes. We're also looking at other programmes across the portfolio. Northumberland Line, for example, that's the reinstatement of the Newcastle to Ashington Blind and Tyne Line, is also being subjected to that Project Speed principles to try and get costs down and the timescales for implementation shortened. So why are we doing this? Very much in terms of affordability, as we'll have heard in the press, money is tight for government across all sort of funding sectors. So we really need to be showing why rail is the right thing for UK PLC to be investing in, and it's also about trying to get benefits delivered earlier, so that the passenger or the freight user is benefiting more quickly. So it's very much in the space of trying to work collaboratively across the industry, both with DFT and ourselves, but also to involve the train operating companies, because obviously they will be the ones ultimately operating the services that will come out of these upgrade programs, and then to try and develop the programs to look at ways to progress the the development work more quickly, so that we can get through that sort of early stages of traditionally the sort of grip process, which is obviously now being replaced by PACE, which tries to make that engineering design more efficient to achieve those cost savings. So my final slide is around industry integration. So clearly, one player in the industry isn't going to be able to deliver everything in its entirety. So what I've tried to put up on the slide is a sort of an example of how the industry increasingly needs to come together to integrate the outputs that the railway is seeking to buy. So back on my first slide, we talked around the train service in terms of the frequency, the journey time, the reliability, etc. But an important part of this is actually for the specifier and the funder to check back periodically to see what they think they're buying is actually what they're getting, because sometimes it doesn't necessarily work out in that way. Are all the efficiencies with the and the interfaces with the other organisations being managed as efficiently as they need to be? So how are we engaging with the train operators? Is that as efficient as it could be? Are we structuring the timetable in terms of the journey times and the frequencies that the passenger who's ultimately going to see the end state of this, is that actually what they think they need? How are we aligning the work with infrastructure capability? So increasingly we're talking around signalling called ETCS, which will give you the in-cab signalling. So we're going to be a significant step change to how routes are currently controlled. So have we got the capability in that space right, and then which routes are the right priority? Power supply is another big issue that we will need to make sure that we have enough juice in the wires. There's enough power in the system to enable the trains that want to run in electric mode to run in electric mode, particularly in order that we can meet the decarbonisation targets, etc. We shouldn't be forgetting our freight customers on the network as well. It's got to be the right balance between freight and passenger, and on different parts of the network, each of those would get different levels of priority depending on their relative importance. So all of that needs to come together to try and integrate all of those development activities, so that we can try and shorten down the timescales for doing this, and to try and deliver these upgrade programs in a more efficient and cost effective way. So that concludes my presentation, Chair, and I'll hopefully take some questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ian. I actually do have one quick question, so you want to come back on camera for me. So yeah, just to let you know, obviously there's a Q&A section at the bottom there. Please pop your questions in. We will get to as many of those as we can at the end. I wanted to ask Ian slightly challenging questions. So as you know, I've got a background with Network Rail from a while back. In Network Rail, I mean, people never got up trying to be slow or inefficient, have they? There's always been awareness within Network Rail that we needed to try to coordinate things better, engage with stakeholders better, engage the industry better. What do you think really makes the difference then, and will there be a real difference with project speed versus what, I know people in Network Rail have been getting out of bed to try and do for, forever. They don't wake up and think, let's be slow, do they? So what will really make the difference?
No, I mean that's a fair challenge. I think it's a number of things. It's not, whilst we're badging this project speed as the initiative to try and achieve those outputs, I think it's reliant on a number of things. I mean, so the Network Rail's made pretty good steps, I think, over the last few years in terms of trying to devolve sort of decision making on autonomy out to the regions. So each of the regions will have greater sort of control in terms of how they do their strategic planning, how they do their development, how they manage their sort of their capital delivery programs, etc. So I think part of it is empowering the regions to do that. But I think it's also trying to recognise that sometimes processes do get a bit bureaucratic, and we do need to try and sort of cut through that red tape and generally have sort of focus on delivering the right things for the railway and the right things for UK PLC. So it's trying to sort of bring a number of things together into that space. And yes, Project Speed is the sort of the banner headline that's kind of overarching it. But yeah, for me, it's a series of things that will come together to achieve that those outputs. And whilst I can't share sort of any metrics at the moment because they're still evolving and we're not in a position to sort of roll this out as best practice yet. But the early signs, I think, are fair to say, are certainly in the encouraging category, which is good.
Thank you so much for that, Ian. And you gave me the expected answer on the IIRP. You can't blame a girl for trying. So, obviously, they're desperate. As you'll see, you've got a chance to look at those questions. I will be coming back to those because there's a couple around freight, and I'm really interested in understanding how we account for freight equally on the network. So we will come back later at the end of the session and probably ask you a couple of those and see if you've got a view on them, Ian.
Sure.
So thank you. Thanks. So my next guest this morning is Rob Warnes. So Rob leads the strategic development and operational planning activities at Northern. And Northern are the biggest train operating company outside of London. Many of you will probably know Rob because he did start his extensive railway career back with British Rail in 1989. So he is a long time in the industry and no doubt familiar to many of you. He chairs the industry's Rail Delivery Group Performance and Planning Forum as well. And he's been instrumental to the inception and development of the Northern Hub and the electrification schemes, which have been the springboard for the transformation of Northern Rail services. So Rob, over to you.
Thank you, Debbie, and good morning, everybody. As Debbie's just said, the biggest train operating company outside of London. Pre-COVID, we were operating 2,800 services per day with 380 trains sets across the north. Significant number of stations, lots of maintenance depots, big train crew depots. So quite an extensive and complex operation covering the whole of the north of England. We certainly were proud to replace some of the aging Pacer trains. In fact, got rid of all the Pacer trains with a fleet of brand new trains, 101 brand new trains now in service across the north. And we're continuing to invest in our operation with significant investment in ticket machines, in customer information, access for all, and a lot of investment in stations, making a much better environment for our customers. Northern have always been a heavily subsidised railway, but we've been working with Atkins and did some work just to prove again that for every pound the government invests in subsidy in the Northern Railway, that supports around £2.50 of economic activity. So government is getting value for money for its investment in the services in the north, and we employ quite a lot of employees and that's supported through supply chain. So we are quite a big economic driver in the north in our own right. So it's important that as we emerge from COVID, we continue to convince government that it's worth investing more and more in the infrastructure and the services. And because Ian said, it takes more than just infrastructure to deliver the outcome and connect those people to opportunities. So infrastructure investment is important. The Manchester is still a bottleneck. We had Northern Hub. We invested a lot of money in Northern Hub with lots of improvements in line speeds of some of the radial routes to Manchester and the iconic Ordsall Chord. However, we didn't quite finish it, and there are still bottlenecks in Manchester that we do need to relieve, whether it's the Ordsall lane junctions, which are all flat junctions that probably need something a bit more significant doing to them, And the Castleville corridor, of course, which is still one of the biggest constraints of getting trains through Manchester. The government created Manchester Recovery Task Force, for which we're proud to be a member, and are driving changes to services and more investment in infrastructure to try and solve some of those problems, because the North Railways will not grow without us sorting out Manchester. And it's not just about the shiny metal, it's about sorting out the stations as well, to provide much better facilities for customers, particularly at those city centre stations in Manchester. We've been doing quite a bit at Leeds. Network Rail have invested significant money in Leeds in recent months, bringing in a brand new Platform Zero, with more work to come this Christmas to enable more trains to operate into the lower number platforms. But that's probably not enough, because Leeds is also one of the big bottlenecks of the north. And as Ian said, we've got the Transpennine route upgrade coming along, which will allow more trains and faster trains to get between the great cities across the north. But if we don't sort out places like Leeds and Manchester, those trains will go a bit quicker across the Pennines, but they won't get through the big cities. So Manchester and Leeds are absolutely critical to levelling up the North's railway. But there's a lot more we can do. It's not all about infrastructure. The Northern Fleet consists of significant numbers of rolling stock, lots of configurations. Most of the fleet is more than 30 years old. Some of it was built back in 1984, when you could have bought that Mark III Escort. And only just over a third of our fleet is electric. Only a quarter of our network is electrified. And with the decarbonisation and clean air agenda that is coming more to the fore, only 15% of our fleet could remain in traffic beyond 2040. We have some of the largest number of diesel mileage of any regional operator, second only nationally behind cross country. So we're heavily reliant on diesel, and we need to move into something that is more sustainable. A lot of our fleet, if we assume isn't going to go beyond 40 years in life, we need to replace the best part of 400 vehicles over the next few years. And we think this is a real opportunity for government to level up in the north with investment in a fleet replacement programme. Yes, of course, we'd like a rolling programme of electrification, but that's incredibly expensive and disruptive. So yes, there are priorities we'd like to see electrified, but we've got a lot of railway to electrify, and we won't do that quickly. So we need to start looking at alternative solutions to this, whether it's bi-modes, and we've just introduced the Class 769, which is a retrofit bi-mode service that is operating predominantly under the wires and uses diesel traction when it's off the wires. But what else can we look at? We've been working with Eversholt and Alstom on proposals for potentially a hydrogen trial up in Teesside, and Teesside is a location that has significant experience in gas and chemical and petrochem. So what a great place to actually create one of the first hydrogen hubs in the UK, providing significant investment in the north. Let's demonstrate that we can use hydrogen as an alternative fuel for rail across the north. Or do we look at batteries? I mean, the Windermere train that operates between Manchester Airport and Windermere operates nearly 90% under the wires and has to do the last bit under diesel. That's ripe for moving to batteries. So do we look at, instead of investing significantly in more wires, do we look at alternatives? That means that the limited resources that government has to spend on infrastructure is focused on where they get the best bang for the buck, and allow rolling stock investment to actually decarbonise and modernise the North Railways. Ian mentioned signalling. Most of the North Railway is controlled by lots of little signal boxes and people pulling levers. We need to move forward quickly to the new cab environment of signalling. That will enable much more infrastructure investment to be done cheaper, because signalling is one of the most expensive and complex bits of any investment in infrastructure. So if we move to cab-based signalling, that's the way of reducing costs and driving more efficient and quicker investment in infrastructure. But it's not all about the big schemes. What about the small schemes? We've been working with TfN on 20 priority schemes to reduce journey times through line speed improvements, working with local authorities to deliver frequency enhancements, places like the Whitby branch, Esk Valley, Blackpool South. How do we really connect more of those people to opportunities by having a more frequent service? Yes, there's lots of clamour for reopening railway lines, and certainly across the Northern have been working with partners to try and push forward on the Northumberland line. Lots of progress being made up there. But other schemes such as Fleetwood and running passenger trains on one of the old freight routes between Chesterfield and Sheffield. But to make all this work reliably, we need investment in the support services that actually deliver those trains. So rolling stock depots, a lot of our depots were built for steam engines, and we're only just now beginning to be able to get the investment, a brand new depot shed at Newton Heath for the brand new trains. Stabling arrangements, we need more stabling arrangements as we improve our fleet. But smart ticketing, how do we make it easy for our customers, that's both current customers and attracting new customers, to travel around our network? How do we get smart ticketing in across the North to really make it that much easier for our customers to travel? So in summary, levelling up priorities, of course, let's do the big schemes. Let's do the great big TRU schemes. There's one of the bridge structures going in just over the last week in Manchester. Let's have a rolling programme of electrification, but let's balance that with new technology that provides that decarbonisation through fleet modernisation of new types of fuels and batteries and hydrogen. Let's get a signalling infrastructure that is fit for this century. Let's move away from people pulling levers in signal boxes. Let's make it easy for people to travel with modern ticketing. And let's make sure that we don't forget some of those smaller communities on those branch lines, such as at Whitby, who with 6 trains a day, they need more than that to really let them have those connections to opportunities in Teesside, which is one of the biggest and fastest growing parts of the Northern economy. So in summary, it's not all about infrastructure. The railway is a system. Let's make sure we get that balance right in investing in trains and stations and ticketing. And here's a great example of where we've done it. We upgraded the route between Preston and Blackpool. Network Rail spent many hundreds of millions of pounds to create a modern railway. And now look at the fantastic new trains that are operating with faster and more frequent services. Thank you, Debbie. You're on mute, Debbie.
So, no, I'm not on mute. I'd taken it off, but it didn't come off. It's like the thing you never want to say. So thanks so much. I mean, that was great. Some fantastic projects going on. Really interested to hear about small projects as well. Really would like, don't forget, in the Q&A, if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask, we'll take them up afterwards. My challenge for you, Rob, because I like to have one at the end of each thing, is that I was really pleased to hear you say that the answer, of course, is not about just electrifying the whole railway, because that doesn't, from a carbon perspective, I'm thinking about our carbon footprint now and the aims and the ambitions of the country in its carbon schemes. But then you did say, you know, we need investment in the next rolling stock, etc., and we can look at alternative forms of transport. I don't disagree with any of that, but obviously in a world where investment is going to have to be limited in some shape or form, should we be bothering about the trains at all, in terms of not, obviously we need the railways, we need to put the trains on the section, but does the type of train matter, given how efficient rail transport is anyway compared to the road? Should that money, rather than be invested in looking at new forms of rolling stock, be focused on electric vehicle charging infrastructures and roads, etc., and trying to get more capacity on the railway for freight so that we could get the lorries off? That's my very quick question. You just move on. But
I think we need to do both, and that's why I'm suggesting that we can lever in private financing so it doesn't come off the government balance sheet in rolling stock. It means that what government needs to spend on electrification can be focused on those freight routes, so that the freight trains can decarbonise, because it's a bigger challenge for a freight train to carry a few batteries than it is a passenger train. Therefore, that we can decarbonise both the freight and passenger by looking at those alternatives of having recharging points for trains at terminal stations, so that they can whiz up the hill and spend a few minutes there, recharge and come back down again without us having to put miles and miles of masts up, so that that money can be spent on focusing on the freight as well as getting the passenger balance right.
Okay. All right, thanks. So I've seen some questions. There are questions coming into the chat as well, which is great, but could you try and use the Q&A section? So there's a chat and a Q&A below. If people could try and use their questions, that'd be really helpful for me. Thank you very much for that, Rob, and we'll come back to you shortly. Okay, so our next speaker today is Owen Wilson. I hope I got the right order. I have. Hi, Owen. So Owen is the Major Road Strategy Manager for Transport for the North. He's got a key role in working with Department for Transport, Highways England, and the local transport authority partners in shaping the policy and the investment priorities for the North's major road network. And this includes development of the regional evidence base, setting out priorities for investment funded through the National Roads Fund. He has also recently led work on coordinating development of Transport for the North's multimodal northern development and delivery of transport and economic strategies with the public and the NGO sectors. So, Owen, over to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Debbie. And just a word of warning, I've cut out twice this morning, so hopefully everything will work smoothly now. So good morning to everyone. If you can move on, Clemmy, to the next slide, please. I'm going to give a very quick overview of TFN and then come on to some of the detail around our investment priorities. So Transport for the North, a subnational transport body, represents the north of England. I'm a great believer in the need for stronger sort of regional governance, and TFN's kind of leading the way in terms of that regional governance for the north of England, working with our 20 local transport authorities, 11 local enterprise partnerships, and actually developing the evidence base and making decisions based on sort of detailed conversations with our members and an agreement from our political members in terms of the priorities for the north of England. We operate a bit like a local government organisation, so all our board meetings, papers are in the public domain. If you can move on, please, Clemmy. In 2019, and this has been mentioned already by Ian, but we published our Strategic Transport Plan, which is our statutory recommendation to the Secretary of State in terms of the priorities for transport investment in the north. And alongside that, we published a long-term investment plan 2020 to 2050, which includes a lot of the schemes we've heard about already this morning, but of course, big rail investments around HS2, NPR, improvements in Manchester, as well as investments on the highway network. So again, if you could move on to the next slide, please, Clemmy. So I thought it would just be worth just thinking about what levelling up is before we get into the sort of transport investment priorities. And it's a much debated area, but I think fundamentally it has to be about improved life chances and equitable life chances for everyone, whether you're born in, say Albans, Dagenham, Hartlepool or Harrogate. You should have the opportunities to get to education, to get a good job and to live a good life. And transport has a key part to play in achieving that. And in 2019, TFN set out how that could be achieved through investment in transport infrastructure. And I think the key point, and I'll come on to this later as a sum up, is there is no one size fits all across all regions of the UK or all parts of the north of England. So it is important that we have more devolution of decision making to support the right investment choices for different parts of the north and indeed of the country as a whole. Again, could you move on, please, Clemmy? So in terms of TFN's priorities for better connectivity, TFN's main focus is on pan-northern regional connectivity on the rail network, the major roads in the north. But we are very aware that travel is about door-to-door journeys, and where we invest in pan-northern links, we also need to have good integration with local networks and investment in local travel. And actually, TFN last year, through our economic recovery package, called for sustained and increased investment in active travel and local public transport. And we've been pleased to see the increased emphasis from government on just that through more investment in cycling and walking and the recent bus back better strategy publication. I think it's absolutely right that we see more investment in local public transport and need to move towards greater integration in terms of ticketing and fairer ticketing, fairer pricing for public transport in the north of England. So you have sort of a capped fare, as you do in London for local travel within a city region, for example. I think just coming back to active travel, one point I would make, and I'm the major road strategy manager. I'm very much TfN supports the need to drive up active travel, and in the Netherlands, for example, we see sort of 27%, would you believe, of trips by cycle, and that equates to around 9% of distance travelled in the Netherlands. Comparing that to the UK, which is sort of 2% and 1%. So there is a real opportunity to reduce some of the demand on the highway network in particular through getting more people walking and cycling. But it won't necessarily answer the problem in terms of decarbonisation or take away the need for investment in now longer distance road networks. We've heard about the need for improved rail connectivity. TfN is strongly pushing for integrated rail plan to be published, and we're very disappointed that it wasn't published before the summer recess for the full delivery of NPR HS2 Eastern Leg, as well as more urgently capacity and reliability improvements in Manchester. Coming onto the highway, I think we want to see targeted investment in the highway network, both on the strategic road network, and we're seeing big investments through the road investment strategy too, A66 dualling, which is long overdue in terms of improved east-west connectivity and providing an additional rung in terms of that connectivity additional to the M62. Also need to see further investment in locally managed roads. The major road network was a concept that TfN promoted 4 or 5 years ago, and we're very pleased to see that taken up by the Department for Transport with new funding available for those major roads in the north. And we're now starting to see some of that investment come through, for example, on York Ring Road, the A1237, in Cumbria, investment on the A595, and plans for bringing forward further investment in Cheshire. A500 is moving forward now, which is all positive in terms of improving that sort of link between the SRN and the MRN. We've heard about better integration. In terms of low carbon technologies, road accounts for around 95% of transport related carbon emissions. So if we are going to tackle that net zero problem issue, which is absolutely imperative, we need to think about how we reduce emissions from road transport. And that has to be a combination of new technologies and trying to reduce the need to travel and mode shift to other modes than the car. TfN is now taking forward work with our partners across the north to look at the requirements for infrastructure charging to support, initially looking at EV infrastructure for electric vehicles, but we're also working with partners looking at hydrogen refueling as well. And at the moment, there are around 20,000 charging points in the country as a whole. And I think it was the CCC, Committee on Climate Change, that said we needed 150,000 by 2025. So there's a lot to do in that area, and we want to support our partners in delivering that infrastructure in the north. And then the last point around digital connectivity, critical that you have good digital connectivity in terms of reducing travel need and also improving the operation and customer experience on our networks. If you can move on, please, Clemmy. So coming back to that devolution point, TfN has published its Northern Transport Charter ambitions, and this is about championing an inclusive and sustainable north, so equity for all across the north of England, having a long-term northern funding settlement. It's very difficult for TfN or anyone to prioritise investment without any clear picture of the level of funding available. TfN's role is to lead strategic transport delivery, and clearly as well, through our Rail North partnership, putting the North Rail passengers first in terms of how we plan and operate the network is critical to TfN. Again, if you can move on, please, Clemmy. So to summarise, in terms of transport priorities, we need greater clarity on rail investment, and again that comes back to the integrated rail plan, and the delay in publication of that plan is now having real impact in terms of bringing forward the business case for Northern Powerhouse Rail. Sustained local investment, support for investment in active travel and bus networks. In terms of the strategic road network, I think I was very pleased, and TfN will be sort of providing feedback on the transport decarbonisation plan and Highways England's recent publication, The Road to Net Zero, to see more emphasis on and perhaps a more holistic approach to road investment. But we still need to see that investment where there's clearly a need to increase capacity on the network, reduce pinch points, and improve connectivity to poorly connected areas. Again, one area which we often look at is East Lancashire, which has bad road and rail connections, east-west and north-south, linking to Manchester. Investment in the MRN, Major Road Network, will continue to promote the schemes that are in the current tranche of funding, which runs till 2025, and are looking for government to bring forward further funding in the next RIS period, 2025 to 2030. And in terms of decarbonisation, TfN's published a decarbonisation strategy, which is now out for consultation, and we'll aim to bring that back to our board in November. And it's really providing a really strong evidence base as to what is required to meet that net zero target and achieve the ambitions of the government and of our northern leaders to reduce carbon emissions. I think can we move on, please, Clemmy? So final slide, some key messages to conclude. We'd like to see a long-term commitment to a funding pipeline in the north of England and greater clarity as to how much funding will be available. TfN has an important role in terms of delivering a joined-up approach. That's with our partners, but also across government. And we believe there's plenty more to do in terms of bringing together those government departments. So we have a kind of a combined approach, much better integrated approach to delivering improvements. Planning white paper, we're expecting at some point the devolution or levelling up paper as well, and all of those need to kind of think about how they can be kind of work together to deliver the best outcomes. We're calling for more devolution of powers, and we're again waiting for that paper to come out. And in terms of the transport industry, we very much welcome the reform of the rail industry, and we'll be working with government in terms of what that means in the north of England. Need to see those meaningful improvements to local networks and services, and in terms of highway, a more holistic approach to delivering good road connectivity. So it's not just about capacity, it's about how you can change people's behaviours as well. And on the last point around decarbonising transport, there is a need to reduce motorised travel, and we'll be working with partners on that. And I know the government's put the emphasis on local authorities to do a lot around demand management and the need to work to deliver more low and zero emission technologies across the networks. Thank you.
Owen, thank you very much for that. So you're going to be saving questions because we've got quite a lot of questions coming in that I really do want to get to. We've got one more speaker to hear first. So for everybody listening, we maybe have to go maybe 5 minutes or so over because I would like to get onto some of those questions. So our final speaker before we can get to the questions coming through is Stuart Jones. So Stuart's the North West Regional Delivery Director for Highways England Regional Investment Programme. It's going to deliver, I mean, Highways England's regional delivery programme is going to deliver over 5 billion of junction improvements, widening schemes, new bypasses across the country, reducing the journey times and increasing reliability of our motorways and major A roads. And the programme is also driving economic growth, providing opportunities for people, businesses across the country to connect the customers and to each other. So, Stuart, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Can we start with slide 2, Clemmy? Just waiting for it to come up on screen there. Yeah, we'll move on to the next slide. So while I wait for that to come up, the strategic road network is the backbone of the country. It consists of over 4,300 miles of motorways and major A roads, which connect people, build communities, they create opportunities, and they help the nation to thrive. So some stats there. Traffic on the SRN accounts for 33% of all journeys and 66% of all freight journeys. Sectors which depend upon the SRN employ 7.4 million people and contribute £324 billion to the economy. And 75% of freight travels by road, and that contributes about £11 billion to the UK economy. So today I'm going to share how we build the programme, how we ensure we've got the capacity to deliver the programme, and what I see as some of the challenges and opportunities. So the second roads investment strategy, RIS2, was published in March 20, and that sets out the government's plan for 2020 to 25 and the future shape of the network. If we can move on to slide 3, please. So RIS2 was developed through extensive public engagement and consultation. In fact, it was the biggest exercise ever undertaken to inform national road investment. And the process used a variety of Highways England strategies and plans. It used Transport Focus's research into road user priorities, and it used DFT's public consultation on Highways England's proposals. The approach for RIS3 will build upon this process. If we can move on to slide 4, please. So we've now started engagement on our next round of route strategies, and we're seeking feedback, as you can see on this slide, from a broad range of road users, communities and interested parties. And the evidence that we gather from this process will inform the development of RIS3 and the long-term planning of the state road network. We'll move to slide 5. I think it's also worth noting that as part of RIS2, the government asked us to develop 32 named pipeline schemes, and they wanted us to develop these to a point where they could enter construction early in road period 3. And they'll decide on which of those schemes to progress as we move towards the end of the current road period. RIS1 was £15 billion, which was 4 times bigger than anything we previously delivered. RIS2 is £27 billion, and this level of growth highlights the need for a strong supply chain. 2 key frameworks that we put in place for RIS2 are the Regional Delivery Partnership, which is an £8.7 billion framework to deliver our regional investment programme, and the Smart Motorways Alliance, a 10-year, £4.5 billion framework to develop, design and construct our Smart Motorways programme. In putting these together, we listened to the supply chain and we learned the lessons from our previous frameworks. If we could move on to slide 6, please. And we did that to develop new approaches and enable collaboration so that we can create confidence through a pipeline of work, so we can enhance capacity and capability, so we can mitigate the impact of external market uncertainty, and so that we can ultimately become the client of choice for these suppliers. If I move on to slide 7, both of these models use regional delivery, both frameworks use regional delivery models, and they promote early involvement so that suppliers can shape solutions and bring innovation. We've linked the KPIs directly to Highways England imperatives of safety, customer and delivery. And really collaboration is at the heart of these frameworks to support development of longer term relationships and really to enable a programmatic approach that allows collaboration through the supply chain. They provide certainty of work and should create an environment that allows suppliers to invest and develop. And they also introduce new entrants. So on to the challenges. Next slide, please. So I think firstly, delivering our smart motorways programme is a key part of the plan for us to reduce congestion, improve journey times, and to drive growth. The alternative approaches of widening, adding more lanes, they just take longer, they cost more, and they cause more disruption and have a greater environmental impact. Yes, they've been a challenge for us. We've seen that in the press. But the recent stock take showed that overall the evidence shows that in most ways, smart motorways are as safe or safer than conventional motorways, but not in every way. So we've got a number of actions that are underway to try and make them safer. One of the key ones is about improving public information and awareness about smart motorways, what to do in an emergency, etc. You might recall our recent Go Left campaign that was on the TV and the radio. So we need to change the public perception, and we need to maintain and gather public confidence in the safety of smart motorways. And really, we need advocates to help us with that. Of course, the other big challenge for us is climate change and carbon. A number of our development consent orders have been challenged. Indeed, the validity of the RIS was recently challenged by the Transport Action Networks. The High Court has rejected that challenge, but we can expect ongoing pressure and challenge in that space. And we've seen it in the press just this week on the A303 at Stonehenge. But I see this threat as an opportunity. We see this threat as an opportunity because we're ambitious about protecting and enhancing the environment. And one of the things we recently published was our plan to net zero highways. And that supports the government's commitment to meeting carbon targets. As a business, we will achieve net zero for our own activities by 2030 and by 2040 for our maintenance and construction activities. I think our biggest opportunity is to create a track record of delivery. Investment in Britain's roads supports a thriving economy. Every pound invested in the strategic road network returns over £2 to the economy. The government invested £15 billion in RIS1, and it was widely regarded as a success. In RIS2, they're investing £27 billion, which tells me that delivering the programme and the benefits that that brings will give the government the confidence to continue to invest. So to summarise, we've got to build the right programme, and the consultation for RIS3 has started. We need the supply chain working with us and investing in skills and innovation. We need to get our message across about how seriously we take our responsibility for safety of our roads and for dealing with the environmental impacts. And we need to maintain our reputation for delivery. Back to you, Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Stuart. And I think hopefully we'll get the chance to get to a couple of questions that are actually specifically asking about motorway safety and the taking out of the hard shoulders, etc., which I'm sure you'll have a view on. However, so if the panel could put the cameras on, I'm going to go to Q&A, please. If you can keep yourselves on mute unless you're answering the question, that would be great. Okay, so I am going to go right back to the beginning of the questions because whoever put the question has been waiting very patiently, and Ian's had plenty of time to think of an answer for it. So I think there's two elements on the freight there. So the second question that we have is about how Network Rail assess the relative importance of freight. And that was actually something that you said when you were talking, Ian. You'd said that obviously we need to assess. But if you could just expand very briefly, but a little more on how, from your perspective, industry integration is going to work with freight, in particular the national coordination team. and they have duties to promote rail freight growth, target setting, and freight access rights. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's fair to say the freight market is certainly dynamic. It's constantly changing, evolving, new markets emerging, etc., that probably emerges in a different way to the passenger market. And as I think that the part of the question was, freight isn't regional, so definitely agree with that. The freight capability within Network Rail is still very much a sort of a central function, so that when new opportunities arise, we do have a national presence that can look at the opportunities that freight market presents from a national strategic perspective. So we have a series of strategic freight targets that have been sort of developed by cross industry, so ourselves, DFT, the freight operators, which sort of shape our thinking. And what we're trying to do is to take that understanding of where the future needs to be and effectively embed it into the regional planning processes, so that both the freight asks and the passenger asks are embedded into what we need to do from an infrastructure perspective, but also a train planning perspective, signalling, etc., perspective, so that it's covering off all of the elements, so that it's not just we'll add it on at the end if there's room type thing. We're not in that space at all, particularly where there are markets that are relatively poorly served by rail at the moment. So and by that what I mean is the rail mode share is relatively low. So there's an awful lot of lorries on certain corridors travelling around that we're thinking, well, actually we should be getting those flows onto rail freight. So there is growth markets to go out, intermodal being the sort of the prime example. But we need to look at those opportunities, or how those opportunities sort of bed in a holistic way, so that we're actually demonstrating value for money for the taxpayer, as well as meeting the requirements of the freight industry. And then once that's happened, it's then a case of trying to embed those aspirations into the sort of the general timetable planning process to get those paths onto the train graph.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you say. Obviously, as you know, I've got some background in how difficult can we get to get a rail freight path, and to actually get that balance between the passenger and the freight. And I don't know, that there's a clear answer to that. And obviously, I appreciate that it's going on. I think the biggest that it's always been looked at in on discussion, but I think there are huge concerns in the industry about the fact that we're devolving regionally, which is a great idea in many, many ways. But that national element of the freight is going to make it increasingly harder to get there. So, however, I don't have a lot of time on that, so I'm going to move on. Nina Smith's put in a question that I'm going to Owen, please. She's quite validly asked, it seems, why does Transport for the North not strongly advocate more tram and very light rail systems across the north? There are proposals for West Yorkshire, but what about Hull, Holderness, York, Teesside, Merseyside, and maybe others?
So, TFN does strongly advocate better integrated networks at the local level. It is the role of our local partners to bring forward those proposals, but where TFN fits in, we can help those local partners in terms of developing the evidence base to support the business case around that investment. And I think one of the real benefits of an organisation like TFN, and one of the strengths, is we've developed a very comprehensive analytical framework, which is open to use by our partners, and it was developed for NPR and for investment in the road network, but is now available across the north to support us in building their business cases in terms of the travel needs, both now but also projected into the future. Looking at future spatial planning development, looking at future jobs growth, and different scenarios in terms of how people travel around, and building in some of the kind of local visions in terms of increasing mode share, for example, on local tram networks. So that is something we would very strongly support at TFN. But these schemes are being led locally, and that's right. That the they sort of sit within the combined authority mayoral authority areas.
Okay, thanks for that, Owen. Okay, so I've got one more question I'm going to ask very specifically to Stuart, and then I have a question that I need that I want to finish with. I want a yes and no from each of the panel members and one sentence as to why that will be. So I'm going to ask Stuart first of all. That last question that's been put in for us there from Nina Smith again. So how is England engaging with road safety organisations or with the environmental organisations? And I think it's linked to the earlier question that we about the hard shoulder on the
yeah. So clearly, as part of the smart motorway stock take and the investigation into that, there's been a lot of conversations with road safety organisations, and I think there's it's fair to say that there are varied opinions about them. I come back to really the overall points that the findings of that stock take were that the smart motorways overall are safer than conventional motorways. And just looking at why that is, I think it's because we've got more control over the traffic. We can control the speed that people travel at. Clearly, we've got some massive challenges that we need to investigate there and sort out. So stop vehicle detection is a big thing that we need to do. We've got to increase the availability and frequency of emergency refuge areas. And as I said before, a key thing is making sure people understand them. I think overall the evidence is there. They are safer. And the other aspect is, if we went to conventional approaches, that would suck a lot of the investment away from some of the other things that we want to do across the network, across rail as well. So I think it's about a balance.
Okay, thank you for that, Stuart. I think, I've heard what you said. I think the arguments about safety of the motorways are going to rage for a while yet, aren't they? I think you've got a long way to go with that in terms of and that renewed public perception now about whether it's safe or not. So the question, we only have time to we're going to sort of wrap up now. I do have one thing that I want to ask you, and what I'd like you to give me, I would like a yes or a no to the question. I'd like to say, should we have this or shouldn't we? And what would be your kind of one sentence comment on it? So Nina has put a question in there, and I know there's a couple of typos, so I hope I am translating what I think she was asking. And it's, do speakers agree that the UK needs a Department for Future Wellbeing with as much clout as the Treasury, to make it more likely that the planet can survive in a habitable state as it is at present? And of course, there's plenty of people who say it's not habitable enough yet, so even now. So I want to know yes or no. Should we have a Department for Future Wellbeing? And what do you think that the biggest problem with that could potentially be? I'm going to go around my screen in order, which is pretty much the order you spoke. So I'm going to ask Ian first. Yes or no?
So yes, but it needs to be funded properly.
Okay, that'd be that biggest issue then, since we can't get lots of things funded properly that we want. That's obviously going to give us a little bit of a challenge. Rob, you're next.
Yes, as Ian said, it's not just about funding. It's about making sure we value properly what decarbonisation and clean air means, so that we can actually properly invest.
Okay, thank you for that. Owen. You're on mute. Oh, I'm so glad I got to say that. Something you just said.
I made that mistake. Yeah, I'm going to go with Ian and Rob as well and say yes, absolutely. Though again, it does need to be funded properly, and we need to see integration across government in terms of how you achieve that. Maybe that could be something a department could lead.
So, and that in itself, as we know, integration across departments isn't always there. So that would be yet another challenge alongside funding, wouldn't it? And then finally, Stuart, yes or no?
It's hard to say no to that one, isn't it? So for me, it would be definitely a yes. I think some of the challenges would be, we know how government works and how powerful the Treasury are. Getting that balance would be a major challenge, but it would be a step in the right direction for me.
Yeah, and so you're right that, you know, brave is the person that will stand there and say, no, we shouldn't have that department. But again, you're absolutely right. So the question was raised particularly with as much clout as HM Treasury. So you could imagine the furore from all the other departments if suddenly a new department was given as much clout when they spend their lives also saying, why have the Treasury got the most clout? Very, very difficult. But an interesting one to ponder and hopefully finish the conference on. So thanks everybody for all of your insights and your patience, etc. It's great for everybody who's joined us this morning. Hope that was helpful and gave people some insight and some pause for thought on everything that's happening in the north of England, and hopefully we'll see you again at a future event. Thanks a lot.